So welcome back to the AI Journal podcast. This week, we're joined by Greg from New Relic. We're going to be looking at everything to do with observability. Me and Greg have had a chat before this, and we're really excited to bring you this episode. And before we get started, Greg, I'd love to welcome you to the show. And if you could give us a bit of a background to who you are and what's led you to where you are in New Relic now, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Hi, everybody. I do have a long career as a CTO and VP of engineering, mostly in the telco and aviation space. So my whole career has been dedicated to developing digital services from network infrastructure and then moving into software and even software in the sky as I was offering services to pilots, passengers, cabin crew, air traffic control overall. All along my career, I knew that monitoring was super important to be able to deliver great quality of service when you have global digital services. And in my last job, I essentially faced very significant challenges of downtime, lack of innovation because we had a monolith on-premise, very significant outages, quality of service issues. So it turned out that many of my teams had different tools, monitoring tools. It was a very traditional siloed organization. And lots of hard work, lots of frustration, lots of us and them. And one of my sysadmin guys said, well, Greg, we have so many monitoring tools. Why don't we add another one called New Relic? Yeah. And for the first time ever, all the teams could see their entire stack from one single platform, had the same view and agree to what was going wrong. So New Relic has been part of my journey to the cloud, to DevOps, to modernizing software. And I must have liked it so much that I actually joined New Relic as their field CTO for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And I've been now in that role for the last 2.5 years.
Yeah, great insight. And I was looking at what you were saying there, Greg. It's really important to us. And you mentioned siloed and all this information being across different areas. I'd love to know what the importance of observability is, what the role New Relic plays, because being able to spot these areas, and I think the COVID and the pandemic has taught us a lot around people how actually siloed their business is. When people, I remember one big company was using a service on one part of their team, and then they approached the same client and they said, well, you're already using us. And it's like, how if you have a tool like that and you can observe it, I'd love to get your viewpoint. What is the importance of observability in a business, Greg?
Yeah, I think observability was born from very significant technology shift that we've had over the last 5 to 10 years. In the past, you had monoliths. They ran on 3-tier architectures. The actual hardware infrastructure did not change that much. You could call the servers Bob and Jenny. You had a Post-it on it. And you had very, very few releases, maybe once, twice, 3 times a year. And so it was enough to monitor, instrument a few key places in your architecture, like, for instance, your infrastructure, and looking at the logs. So most organizations have built their organic monitoring on many parts of the infrastructure and also on logs. As we move to cloud, as we modernize software, and there's more and more microservices and distributed architectures, and as DevOps has taken off, some of our customers are making thousands of releases per day. So I think the velocity, the complexity, the fragmentation of their architecture makes it impossible to use traditional monitoring tools. So observability is this new generation where you essentially instrument all of your stack, from the low-level hosts to the virtual machines and containers and Kubernetes clusters, to the middleware, to the software, but also the digital experience and the business. And it's only by having all of that data in one place that you can really understand your architecture and therefore understand how your system behaves. And you can detect issues developing before they actually impact the customer. So what you see right now, why is observability such a hot topic? It's essentially because it's this new generation of capability of collecting massive amounts of telemetry very cost effectively, use monitoring as code, and essentially drive your stack end to end in real time.
And Greg, if you were to bring that to life for myself and the audience, have you got a client? Have you got an industry example? And could you just walk us through that so we understand a little bit more detail the business benefits of this?
Okay. Yeah, well, I have got many. Let's try and think. So maybe I'll use a few examples to categorize some of the benefits. William Hill. William Hill is a major betting and gaming company. They have more than 5 million transactions per day. They have 5 million price changes per day. And one of their key stakes is obviously availability, resolving issues very fast. And so William Hill was on a journey to say, we want to be able to solve a very high amount of our P1 outages in less than 60 minutes, because every minute passing is money. And so they decided to consolidate, deploy New Relic, and start to have this observability end-to-end of their stack. Thanks to that, they've really been able to understand and detect issues very quickly, create service level objectives and SLAs, and start to have all the teams independent to be able to troubleshoot their code, fix it very quickly, understand. And now they moved from 60% of their P1 outages solved in less than 60 minutes to 75%, and they are now moving to 90% of their outages. So here the benefit is really about availability, uptime, being always on, which so many companies depend on. Maybe another example is Sportradar. Sportradar is a massive sports scoring organization. They provide about results for about 400,000 matches per year over 60 sports, major leagues. And when the management changed, they found a highly siloed organization. Each of the teams would use different tools, different metrics, different ways of troubleshooting. And they wanted to implement the Spotify model, which for Sportradar they called Sportify. And to do that, they needed a unified set of metrics, an approach to single pane of glass, defining service level objectives and SLAs. And New Relic has been the glue, the ability for all teams to build that unified language, collect telemetry for their teams, have each of their team independent in troubleshooting and developing software, but also being able to feed a unified set of metrics, measurement, SLAs. And therefore, they've been able to really improve their quality of service. And now they have more than 500 developers in 17 different squads that are fully independent developing software together. So these are examples of the benefits.
Oh, wow. It sounds like if you get the coding right, that provides the platform and the basis for everything else that goes on top of that. Does that make sense? Is that an accurate description?
Yeah, I think what is most important is what we call the full stack. Why full stack? As we said in the past, we used to use infrastructure monitoring. We looked at CPU and RAM utilization to say, is something going wrong? Yeah. And I had conversations about a lot of companies using APM, application performance management, so that they could instrument their code. And by instrumenting their code, they could understand the performance of transactions, latency, throughput, errors, stack traces. But in fact, it's not enough. You need everything. Why? Also because a lot of issues in code happen in middleware. So you need to have visibility on your middleware as well. And you need to see it all end to end. An issue could develop on the server. An issue can develop in a new version of a middleware starting to consume more memory than expected. Or it can be in your code and a Java error or a .NET crash. Yeah. And so what we realize is more and more developers want to have that full stack view, because that's how they get a sense of their technical debt, or that's where they get a sense of where an issue is developing and what they need to do to understand it very quickly, attribute it to the right part of the stack. And then obviously, because they understand and attribute, they can go much faster at resolving the issue as well. So it's valid both for production, but also for developing more resilient, higher available, high performance architectures.
I like that. I remember. Sorry, yeah, it sounds like a great solution. And it's that visibility. I remember years ago, the CPU would spike and you wouldn't have a clue why it was spiking. Used to just start turning things off bit by bit by bit and could never find it.
Or throwing more memory, if you recall, adding more servers and throwing more memory, just in case.
That was it. Hardware option first.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tom.
No, I was going to say, I love it because you touched on a point there, Greg, with the code and something we were getting questioned on earlier today and things that have popped up. I remember we were speaking to someone that does a lot with different servers, and it makes me question, you mentioned it, Greg, the role the cleanliness of a code has to play, or the data when you're doing this, when you're achieving these benefits and these massive results and massive successes for the companies you mentioned and further industries and more companies that you have under your belt. How important is it? How important is the cleanliness of the code or the cleanliness of the data to be able to achieve these things, to be able to get that observability on what they're doing with their software stack?
Okay, so what I'm seeing today with the companies that I really see leverage observability in a very powerful way, they create what I would call a virtuous circle. Yeah. So oftentimes it starts with essentially wanting to modernize your monitoring capabilities to continue to guarantee uptime, reliability, and performance. So understanding how your code runs to make it run at high performance or as on. Yeah. But after you get that, the great thing is you start to detect your issues much earlier before they impact your customers. You start to resolve them faster. And you also address your technical debt because you understand the recurring issues that create those incidents and issues. So after a few weeks or months, you get less incidents. So you got more time to do something else, like make your stack more innovative or more resilient. So once you get that, you start to be much more proactive in the way you react to incidents. So you deal with incidents. You move away from reactive ticket handling with your customer telling you got a problem to detecting those issues, resolving them, and then going to make your architecture better or develop new code. And then observability allows you to understand the business behavior because your transactions, your software represents your business, but also observability covers the end user experience with real user monitoring. So after a while, if you've got less incidents, you've got more time to focus on what's the experience of my end users and customers. Yeah. Do they abandon my software at what stages of the journey? How do I understand what the friction points are that create errors, crashes, HTTP 500 errors? And you can go at improving that. And all of a sudden, you start to improve customer experience, which means loyalty, engagement, conversion, and more business. And then you start to automate observability so that whenever you release a new piece of software, immediately that piece of software starts to report its performance. So in a matter of seconds, you start to see whether your new version of your software is behaving better than the previous one, is it introducing issues. So you become more agile and you increase velocity. And that you got the perfect cycle. If you create issues, you detect them faster, you got less of them, you innovate more, you know immediately whether your customers are happy and if it creates more business. And if it doesn't, you can roll back, you can adjust. And this is the virtuous circle I'm talking about with observability.
I remember years ago that all those software tools were very much in the domain of the administrator. And you're mentioning there the end user can benefit. But what are the different types of monitoring software? What's the different types of things that I can see as a person somewhere in that stack that allows me to do exactly what you're describing and leverage all those benefits?
Okay. So in observability, we love to refer to MELT, metrics, events, logs, and traces. So that's the type of telemetry. Metrics, everybody understands. They're kind of a certain quantity by minute or hour or second. Events are the richest of telemetry. It's every single transaction with its latency, its throughput, its errors, a mobile crash, anything that is a granular event. And then we've got the logs, good old logs, still extremely useful because that's how developers injected their know-how and knowledge into their pieces of code, leaving traces of breadcrumbs of the issues they create. And then we've got traces, distributed traces, which is how you are able to see how a transaction traverses multiple microservices and spans. So therefore, you understand where latency appears or errors appear in a distributed transaction. And we are able to deploy telemetry in the infrastructure level, hosts, VMs, containers, Kubernetes clusters, so everything that abstracts a layer of compute. And that gives you the famous CPU, RAM, disk processes, changes of inventory. Middleware is very important. It's a critical piece of software. So you will collect telemetry from your cloud providers, from your on-premise open source middleware like databases, load balancers, message queues. And then you will instrument your software so that you can really understand the performance of your individual transactions, which gives you a very accurate description of your business. On top of that, you will instrument your user monitoring, so real user monitoring. You will inject a small JavaScript in the browser. You will integrate a library in the mobile, iOS or Android, and that will allow you to understand the user experience on top of the actual software stack. And then you can add business data. You can very easily, in an observability platform, add business attributes, like if I had a transaction, what was the dollar value of that transaction? That's more of a custom metric or event, but also what kind of loyalty tier was it? So that then you can pivot your data by loyalty tier, customer class, business process, or whatever. So if you realize that you can instrument from the lowest level of infrastructure to your middleware and software that describes your business, to how that impacts user experience and business, you've got a full real-time view of your stack.
Wow, I like it. Much better than the tracing I did 20 years ago as a coder, which was to start from nowhere and work your way towards somewhere.
Yeah, I know. And also we have greatly improved on a number of things. Like the logs in the past have always been a special animal. So most people who would use an APM or an infrastructure monitoring, at some stage, they conclude with a glooming look that they need to go see the logs, right? And which means essentially going in the basement with a shovel and starting to dig into terabytes of logs in search for, you don't really know what, but searching the logs. Yeah. Observability has allowed now to dynamically correlate the logs of an outage, of an issue, of a Java error to that specific transaction. So what could take literally hours or days of search now takes one click, which is also a huge productivity gain for the team. So not only are you having less incidents, you're solving them faster, but you're also gaining efficiency on using the observability platform itself.
That's where were you 20 years ago?
Yeah, we all have the bruises and the scars and yeah.
Yeah. I love it because I'm obsessed with, and Kieran knows this as well, when we look at projects, and my background of being marketing, it's always looking at how to make it as easy as possible for the user. It's one thing they say Amazon has going for it, the classic big yellow button, they have all your details, check out. And if you can have something like that as well, like you just explained, you've given them not only something that massively enhances their experience, but also is massively valuable as well. So I think it's incredible.
Yeah.
And I'd love to know sorry, go on.
Yeah. And what I wanted to say is also that we try to provide a platform that allows teams to adapt to their working model.
Yeah.
First, an observability platform allows you to query a huge data model so you can answer what we call unknown unknowns. A lot of the questions you find that create issue in your stack is not directly raised from an alert. It's about querying the data because you see on some dashboards, you see some funny behavior, and you start to ask questions to your data. You query your data to say, what's going on? Do I have this transaction not behaving the same on two different load balancers in my cluster? Or actually, if you use anomaly detection and AI, actually, AI will tell you that before you ever notice, but that's something else. What we see is that some companies are very dashboard driven. They like to create visualizations of their data, and this is how they drive the performance of their stack. Other teams are totally alert driven. They say, we don't want to open New Relic before we get an alert on our Slack or on our PagerDuty. That's when we will open the platform because we know something is wrong. So you have to be able to cope with very, very diverse ways of working. But what is most important is that we have an opinion about what is the right way of troubleshooting, detecting, resolving, and we help through curated journeys to make that process efficient. Whether you're alert-based or dashboard-based, we still have an opinion on how to do that best.
Love it. And I think that's always the key point, isn't it, Greg? Understanding how that customer wants to work. And I remember we were speaking to a developer, I don't know whether you were in the conversation, Kieran, and they said, it was at Square AI Week, and they were saying how someone can come to them and they can say, that's great that you can do that, but you can't do it how I want to do it. So it's like, what's it if it doesn't match what I want to do? Like that AI algorithm or pattern is great, but it's not matching our kind of agenda or our strategy. Yeah. And I think that's a great point you highlighted, Greg.
One of the other benefits that we are seeing for most of the companies that are advanced in their observability journey, because there's a kind of a pattern, right? You start with availability, uptime, and performance. Then you start to be more proactive. So you deal more with performance than uptime. Yeah. Then you start to care about your customer experience. And then ultimately you start to deal with the business.
Yeah.
And a lot of our customers now are really visualizing the behavior of their business in an observability platform. So they will juxtapose the performance of their software and the performance of their business. And that drives a number of behaviors. The first is, if you're an operator, you watch at the screen and you see CPU go up 50%. You don't care, essentially. But if you start to see the sales volume of your company go down 5%, then you care, and you wake up and you react. So by providing business consequences, visualizing those consequences to operators, you make them much more reactive and engaged, and they understand why they work and who they work for. But also the business gets a much better understanding of potentially things like balancing technical debt and new features. Yeah. If you start to see that there is a cost of business to have errors in your Java transactions, then the next sprint, rather than introducing a new feature, you will accept that Java error finally gets fixed. So it creates a much more collaborative dialogue between the developers, the people in charge of running the platform, production, operation, SRE, and also the business people, and also much better understanding of how the software behaves and drives business growth or release acceptance.
Yeah, the business intelligence part you were getting to earlier on, right? It's making sure.
Yes. And we've got some funny examples of that. So some of our customers, like Axido is a major provider of TV broadcast software, streaming software. And sometimes their software runs, and broadcasting major programs out in Asia, and it's difficult to know what the end user experience is right at the end of that TV screen.
Yeah.
And so they use social networks, and they capture keywords in social networks to build alerts in New Relic, so that if they start to see sentiment degrading on Twitter and Facebook, they can alert that there might be a problem for that particular broadcaster in that country, and they might have to do something.
Yeah, great for marketing as well, right?
Yeah. Another company is using New Relic to inject weather data. What would you ever do with weather data in an observability platform? Well, they are a transportation company, and they know that if it's going to rain, they're going to double their number of calls, so they can scale their infrastructure ahead of the rain. So they can be much more efficient in terms of scaling and optimizing cost whilst meeting the demand. So funny things like that, but it shows you how businesses can tie with the IT performance in a much smarter way.
What would you say then, Greg, just to to companies thinking about starting out this journey or wanting to optimize their software? What advice would you give them based on all the things you've learned?
What I try to say is a platform like New Relic contributes, an observability platform contributes to uptime, reliability, and performance, the foundation. It helps you go faster, increase your velocity as a development team, and release code faster but of a higher quality. It also allows you to be more scalable and cost efficient by consolidating tools and data, streamlining your troubleshooting processes. And it also allows you to master the customer experience. So it's a broad set of capabilities. And what's important to know is what are your priorities. So most companies that start an observability project, we like to ask them, what are you trying to achieve? Over the next 6 months, is your priority mean time to repair and outages? Is it about customer experience? Is it about increasing your velocity? Because the danger is that if you try to do too much too quickly, people can get lost. They will start to build dashboards which are disjoint, and they will not get the benefit, as much benefit as they would like. So I think it's important to align what the observability platform can do to what your priorities are, so that everybody wins.
Love it. And you touched on a great point, because a lot of companies, especially with AI strategies or priorities, they don't know. And it's always thinking, you ask them and it's like, make more money or whatever it be at a very basic level. So I think it's a very important point you touched on, Greg. I feel like we could ask a lot more questions, but for the next time, we're looking forward to having you back on. But where can people find you? Where can they ask more around you, Greg, and New Relic, and find out more about the awesome work you're doing, sir?
So I'm Gregory Ouillon. I'm on LinkedIn, but most importantly, New Relic is on newrelic.com. And so just come to our site, reach out, and we'll be happy to get in touch and, discuss what your needs and demo, POC, whatever it takes for you to implement observability successfully.
Love it. And we'll put that in the show notes as well when people watch this show. And from my side, Greg, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on, sir. Really appreciate it. And some great notes that we'll be taking away to learn from.
Okay, guys. Thank you very much. You have a great day.